When people enter a marriage with a narcissist, they often believe they are choosing a partner. But over time, many come to realize something far more unsettling. They were not married to a real, emotionally present person, but to a carefully constructed image. At first, that image feels intoxicating. It is attentive, confident, charismatic, even ideal. It seems to see you, to understand you, to choose you in a way that feels profound. And because human beings are wired for connection, that feeling can override subtle warning signs. What you are responding to is not intimacy, but a performance designed to secure attachment and validation. This is not because the narcissist is deliberately calculating in every moment. Often, they are not consciously deceiving you. The false self they present is the only self they know how to be. From a psychological perspective, this persona develops early, usually in an environment where love was conditional. They learned as children that being authentic was unsafe or unrewarded. So they adapted. They became what was praised, what was needed, what was admired. Over time, this adaptation solidified into an identity. By adulthood, the performance is no longer a strategy, it is a survival structure. In the early stages of the relationship, this false self feels deeply personal. You may hear phrases like, "I've never felt this way before," or "You're the only one who truly understands me." The intensity can feel spiritual, even faded. But what is happening is not mutual seeing, it is projection. The narcissist is not responding to who you are in your complexity, but to what you represent to them: admiration, safety, validation, and a sense of self. You are not loved for your humanity, but for the role you play in stabilizing their identity. As the relationship settles into marriage, the cracks begin to appear. The image cannot be maintained indefinitely. Real life demands vulnerability, compromise, emotional attunement. And this is where the false self falters. When you express needs, set boundaries, or reflect their limitations, the response may be confusion, defensiveness, or withdrawal. It can feel as though the person you married has disappeared. But in truth, that person never fully existed. What existed was a mirror, reflecting back what you longed to see and what they needed you to believe. Philosophically, this reveals a painful truth about the nature of identity. When a self is built on external validation rather than inner connection, it becomes fragile. It must be constantly reinforced. Marriage, which ideally offers a space for authenticity, becomes instead a stage where the narcissist must perform and you must applaud. The relationship shifts from partnership to maintenance. You may find yourself working harder to preserve harmony, avoid conflict, or recapture the early magic, unaware that the foundation itself is unstable. Over time, you may experience a sense of emotional loneliness, even while being married. There's conversation, shared history, even moments of laughter, but something essential is missing: the depth, the safety, the mutual vulnerability. These cannot exist when one partner is hiding behind a persona. You begin to feel unseen, not because you are invisible, but because the other cannot truly see. They are too preoccupied with preserving their image to meet you where you are. This dynamic often leads to self-doubt. You may wonder if you are asking too much, if your needs are unreasonable, if you are the problem. But the discomfort you feel is not a sign of failure, it is a sign of incongruence. Your nervous system recognizes that what is being offered is not real connection. It senses the absence of authenticity and longs for something more grounded, more human. Understanding this can be both heartbreaking and liberating. Heartbreaking because it means letting go of the fantasy that the relationship can become what it was never built to be. Liberating because it returns your power. You stop trying to awaken something that cannot wake. You stop blaming yourself for the limitations of another, and you begin to see that your longing for depth is not a flaw, it is your humanity calling you back to yourself. After the false self has secured the bond and the marriage has settled into routine, a quiet shift begins to take place. At first, it is almost imperceptible. The long conversations grow shorter. The emotional curiosity fades. The warmth that once felt constant becomes conditional. You may not be able to name what is wrong, but you feel it in your body, a subtle tightening. A growing sense that you are no longer being met. What is happening is not a failure of love, but a revealing of structure. A marriage with a narcissist, your emotional needs slowly become invisible. In the beginning, you were essential. You were seen, praised, idealized. Your presence stabilized their sense of self, and that made you feel deeply valued. But once that role is secured, once the relationship feels permanent, The narcissist no longer needs to invest in the same way. The energy that once flowed toward you now flows back into self-preservation. Emotional attunement is replaced with expectation. Your needs are not rejected outright. They are simply overlooked, as if they no longer register in the relational field. From a psychological perspective, this is not because you have changed, but because the structure of the narcissist's inner world cannot sustain mutuality. Their attention is not relational, it is strategic. It moves toward whatever supports their identity and withdraws from whatever challenges it. When you express vulnerability, sadness, or a desire for closeness, it may be met with irritation, dismissal, or silence. Over time, you learn often unconsciously to minimize yourself, to choose peace over truth, to carry your feelings alone. This creates a profound form of emotional loneliness. You are not alone in the practical sense. There is a partner in the home, a shared life, a history, but emotionally, you feel as though you are standing at a closed door, knocking, hoping for a response. The relationship becomes a place where your inner world has no echo. And this absence begins to shape how you see yourself. You may start to question whether your needs are too much, whether your sensitivity is a burden, whether you are asking for something unreasonable. But the truth is simpler and more painful. You are asking the wrong person for what they cannot give. The narcissist is not withholding because they do not care in a conventional sense. They are limited by an emotional architecture that cannot hold another's experience alongside their own. Their inner world is organized around survival, not connection. And survival, in this context, means prioritizing the self at the expense of mutuality. Philosophically, this reveals a deeper tension between individuality and relationship. True intimacy requires the capacity to be affected by another, to allow their experience to matter as much as your own. But for the narcissist, being affected feels dangerous. It threatens the fragile self they have constructed. So they retreat into emotional self-sufficiency, leaving you to carry the relational weight alone. Over time, you may find yourself grieving a loss you cannot name. You are mourning not just what is gone, but what was never fully there. You may stay because of hope, history, or responsibility, telling yourself that if you try harder, love more, or change yourself, the connection will return. But the more you abandon your own needs, the further you drift from yourself. Understanding this dynamic is not about blame, it is about clarity. When you see that your invisibility is structural, not personal, something shifts. You stop chasing validation from someone who cannot offer it. You begin to listen to the quiet voice inside that says, I matter too. As your emotional needs fade into the background, another shift quietly takes their place. Love, which once felt expansive and unconditional, begins to feel earned. Affection arrives only when the atmosphere is calm, when there is agreement, when you are useful, when you do not challenge the narrative. And without realizing it, you begin living inside a system where connection is no longer a shared space, but a reward. This is where love becomes conditional and transactional. And it is one of the most damaging aspects of marriage to a narcissist. At first, the conditions are subtle. A look of approval when you comply, warmth when you avoid conflict, distance when you speak your truth. The nervous system learns quickly. You start anticipating G-moods, adjusting your tone, editing your needs, not because you are manipulative, but because you are trying to survive emotionally. Human beings are wired for attachment. When that attachment feels threatened, we will contort ourselves in ways we never imagined, all in the hope of restoring connection. Psychologically, this dynamic is not accidental. The narcissist's inner world is organized around control and validation. They need to feel admired, superior, and central. When you offer that, the relationship feels safe. When you do not, it feels dangerous to them. So, the system becomes self-reinforcing. You give what stabilizes them, and in return you receive moments of closeness. Over time, this exchange becomes the emotional economy of the marriage. But there is a cost. When love is conditional, the self begins to shrink. You start to measure your worth by how well you perform, how little you disturb, how much you accommodate. The spontaneous parts of you, your curiosity, your anger, your vulnerability begin to disappear. You are no longer relating as a whole person, but as a role, and roles, no matter how well played, cannot nourish the soul. Philosophically, this speaks to a profound distortion of love. Love is not meant to be a transaction. It is not something to be earned through obedience or admiration. It is meant to be a space where two people can exist in their full humanity with all their complexity. When love becomes conditional, it loses its essence. It becomes a tool of regulation rather than a source of connection. You may notice that your partner seems most affectionate when they feel good about themselves. When they are admired, successful, or in control, there is warmth. When they feel threatened, criticized, or insecure, love is withdrawn. This is not about you. It is about their emotional regulation. You become part of a system designed to manage their internal state rather than a partner. In a shared life, over time, this can create a deep sense of confusion. You may feel loved one moment and invisible the next. You may question your memory, your perceptions, your expectations. You may tell yourself that this is just how relationships are, that you are being too sensitive. But your nervous system knows the truth. It knows when love is not safe, when it must be earned, when it can be taken away. Recognizing this is a turning point. It does not mean you must leave, but it does mean you must see clearly. You cannot build intimacy on conditions. You cannot heal in a space where your worth is negotiated. The longing you feel is not for the person you married, but for the safety of being loved without having to perform. In marriage to a narcissist, conflict is inevitable because every relationship encounters disagreement, tension, and the friction of two human beings living together. But what makes these conflicts particularly destructive is not the disagreement itself. It is the way the narcissist rewrites reality to please their image. In their world, being wrong is intolerable. Admitting limitation is dangerous. And vulnerability is a threat to survival. So conflict is not simply an interaction. It is a threat to the structure of the self they have meticulously constructed. The result is a relational pattern where truth is fluid, and reality is often experienced through a lens that favors the narcissist's ego at the expense of shared understanding. From the outside, this rewriting of reality can be subtle. It begins with minimization. Your words, your feelings, your perceptions are downplayed. A legitimate expression of hurt may be met with, "You're overreacting," or "That didn't happen that way." Over time, what starts as small distortions grows into outright denial. Events are remembered differently. Conversations are reframed. Intentions are misrepresented. This is not just manipulation, it is a survival mechanism. The narcissist cannot tolerate evidence that conflicts with the self-image of perfection, control, or moral superiority. So reality itself becomes negotiable. Psychologically, this has a profound impact on the partner. You may begin to question your own memory, your judgment, your sanity. This is the hallmark of what psychologists call gaslighting, a systematic distortion of facts and experiences that undermines your sense of reality. Gaslighting is more than a tactic. It is a relational environment where the narcissist maintains emotional dominance and shields themselves from the vulnerability that honesty would require. In a marriage, this creates an ongoing cycle of confusion, self-doubt, and emotional erosion. The philosophical dimension of this pattern is striking. Reality, at its core, is relational. It exists in the interplay between perception, memory, and shared experience. When one partner consistently redefines reality to serve their self-concept, the relational fabric phrase, the marriage no longer functions as a space for mutual understanding and shared life. It becomes a stage for performance, a domain where truth is pliable and morality is subjective. The partner seeking authenticity is trapped in a world that feels increasingly unstable, unpredictable. This distortion often escalates in moments of stress or exposure. When the narcissist feels challenged, criticized, or even mildly inconvenienced, the rewriting intensifies. Small disagreements can erupt into crisis with blame assigned, intentions questioned, and past events retold in a way that favors the narcissist's narrative. Emotional safety becomes conditional. The partner must navigate a labyrinth of shifting perceptions and hidden rules, always conscious of the potential for misstep. Over time, this creates chronic hypervigilance, anxiety, and a sense of walking on eggshells. Yet, while the experience is destabilizing, it also offers clarity, recognizing that reality is being distorted not to punish you personally, but to protect a fragile self-image reframes your understanding. It is not a reflection of your worth or your perception. It is a reflection of the narcissist's limits. They cannot tolerate imperfection in themselves, and thus they impose a subjective version of reality on the relationship. Understanding this allows you to see the relational architecture clearly. You are living in a world shaped not by shared truth, but by the narcissist's need for self-preservation. This insight is both sobering and empowering. It clarifies why attempts at reason often fail. Explaining, confronting, or proving your perspective rarely changes the pattern, because the issue is structural, not situational. The narcissist is defending an inner world that not accommodate accountability or vulnerability. Attempts to appeal to fairness, logic, or moral reasoning are often met with deflection, anger, or continued denial. Your task is not to win the argument, but to recognize the architecture of the system you inhabit. Ultimately, the lesson here is one of discernment. You cannot co-create reality with someone who refuses to engage with it authentically. You cannot anchor your sense of self in a relational space that redefines truth to protect fragility. The only path to stability is to anchor yourself in your own perception, your own memory, and your own values, independent of the distortions that swirl around you. By doing so, you reclaim authority over your inner world, even when the external world remains unpredictable and manipulated. That of the most insidious parent in marriage to a narcissist is the way they shift the emotional burden onto you, leaving you to carry feelings and experiences that are not yours to bear. It often begins subtly, with a subtle withdrawal when they feel stress, frustration, or shame, and a reliance on you to stabilize the emotional environment. Over time, this becomes a systemic dynamic. Their unresolved fear, anger, and pain are projected outward, and you are expected to absorb, manage, or soothe them. It is a relational inversion where the partner becomes the container for the very emotions the narcissist cannot face within themselves. Psychologically, this projection is not always conscious. The narcissist has learned, often from early relational experiences, that emotional vulnerability is dangerous. Feelings like guilt, inadequacy, and fear threaten the carefully constructed identity that shields them from rejection or abandonment. To survive psychologically, they develop a pattern of deflection. Their own discomfort must not enter awareness, and so it is cast onto someone else. In marriage, you are usually the most accessible and most emotionally attuned target. They may not even realize the depth of the impact this has on you. They are simply functioning within the architecture of their self-protection. For the partner, the consequences are profound. You may notice a persistent sense of heaviness or exhaustion, as if you are carrying more than your own life. You become hypervigilant, monitoring moods, adjusting behaviors, and constantly anticipating emotional shifts. Your own feelings may be minimized or dismissed, because they are secondary to the task of maintaining the narcissist's emotional equilibrium. Over time, this creates a chronic state of emotional labor, where your own inner needs are ignored in service of another's stability. Philosophically, this pattern reflects a fundamental inversion of the relational contract. Marriage, ideally, is a space for mutual support, shared vulnerability, and co-creation of safety. When one partner cannot contain their own emotional experience, and instead projects it onto the other, the relational balance collapses. The partner becomes a surrogate, a repository for emotions that are not theirs to process. The relationship ceases to be a dialogue of equals and becomes a dynamic of caretaker and ward. This dynamic also reinforces self-doubt in the partner. You may begin to question whether your own feelings are legitimate, whether your reactions are excessive, whether you are being selfish. The subtle and relentless weight of carrying someone else's unresolved pain can erode your self-trust. Over time, you may internalize the message that your own needs are secondary, that emotional survival means suppression, and that your own authenticity must be sacrificed for the sake of peace. The narcissist, meanwhile, often experiences a sense of relief from projecting their inner turmoil. They feel lighter, less burdened, because the emotional work that would require introspection, vulnerability, and self-awareness has been outsourced. Yet this relief is illusory. Projecting one's pain does not resolve it, it only hides it temporarily, creating an ongoing cycle where unresolved emotions accumulate and intensify, periodically erupting in conflict, withdrawal, or manipulation. The emotional burden never disappears, it is merely displaced. For the partner who has been carrying this weight, understanding the mechanics of projection can be both illuminating and liberating. It reframes the experience. You are not weak, overly sensitive, or responsible for another's emotional state. The exhaustion, confusion, and frustration you feel are natural responses to an impossible relational demand. Recognizing this allows you to begin reclaiming space for your own emotional experience, to identify where the projections end and your authentic feeling begin. In practical terms, this may involve developing boundaries, strengthening self-awareness, and seeking support outside the marriage. It may mean articulating your own needs clearly, resisting the pull to absorb another emotions, and refusing to internalize blame for feelings that are not yours. The work of separation here is not necessarily physical, but psychological. It is about reclaiming sovereignty over your own mind, heart, and nervous system. Ultimately, this pattern reveals a deeper truth about human connection. A relationship cannot thrive when one person is perpetually asked to carry what belongs to the other. Emotional intimacy requires mutual containment, empathy, and the courage to face one's own feelings. When these capacities are absent, the relationship becomes a mirror of limitation rather than a space of growth. Recognizing this allows you to stop mistaking burden for love, self-sacrifice for connection, and compliance for harmony. At the heart of understanding marriage, to a narcissist lies a critical turning point. The recognition that your energy spent trying to fix, change, or awaken them is ultimately misdirected. For years, you may have believed that if you could simply love harder, communicate more clearly, or meet them at the deepest level of their woundedness, the relationship could transform. This belief is both understandable and deeply human. We are wired to seek connection, to repair rupture, to restore balance. But in a marriage to a narcissist, these efforts often meet with resistance, deflection, or indifference. The truth is harsh but liberating. Healing begins not when you change them, but when you stop trying to. When we say that freedom begins here, it does not mean detachment in the superficial sense, or the cold rejection of emotion. It means reclaiming the authority over your own inner world. It is the process of disentangling your sense of worth, your emotional stability, and your perception of reality from someone who can offer them consistently. For the narcissist, connection is conditional, contingent, and performative. For you, it can be intentional, grounded, and sovereign. This is the first step toward liberation, recognizing where your responsibility begins and ends. Psychologically, this is about boundaries. Narcissists often test, override, or completely ignore the limits of their partner. Whether consciously or unconsciously, they operate as if the relationship exists primarily to reinforce their sense of self, and not as a shared life. Your attempts to educate, correct, or awaken them may be interpreted as criticism or a threat, leading to defensiveness or emotional withdrawal. In this environment, your efforts to fix them are not just futile, they are a form of self-erasure. The moment you stop trying to change them is the moment you reclaim your own agency. This recognition does not imply that you are abandoning love or compassion. In fact, it is the most profound form of care you can offer yourself. Love that is bound to hope for transformation is conditional, anxious, and exhausting. Love that begins with self-awareness is deliberate, centered, and resilient. By choosing to focus on your own healing, you are creating a space where authentic connection is possible, not with someone who is unwilling or unable to engage, but with yourself and with those who can reciprocate your humanity. Philosophically, this stage of understanding aligns with an essential truth about human relationships. You cannot cultivate what is not possible. Emotional growth and accountability are capacities that emerge from willingness and self-awareness. No amount of external pressure or moral persuasion can create insight where it does not exist. The narcissist's lack of capacity for genuine introspection is not a reflection of your inadequacy, it is a reflection of the architecture of their inner world. Accepting this frees you from the endless cycle of frustration, disappointment, and self-blame. Practically, this means shifting your energy. Instead of attempting to awaken them, you turn toward yourself. You examine the patterns that drew you to this relationship, the way you may have accommodated, excused, or minimized your own needs. You begin to articulate your values, set emotional boundaries, and prioritize your mental and spiritual well-being. You stop internalizing blame for their limitations, and you start nurturing your own resilience. This shift is not instantaneous. It is a gradual reorientation of attention, intention, and care. In this process, one of the most profound realizations emerges. You are not responsible for their emotional survival. The narcissist may try to imply that you are, through guilt, manipulation, or criticism, but their emotional state, their fulfillment, and their healing belong to them, not to you. The sooner this boundary is internalized, the sooner you reclaim clarity. You begin to see that your time, energy, and emotional resources are finite, and they deserve to be invested where they can be met with reciprocity, presence, and respect. This awareness also transforms your understanding of love itself. Real love is not measured by how much you give to someone who cannot receive it is measured by how fully you allow yourself to exist and engage without compromising your integrity. By stopping the effort to fix a narcissist, you are not abandoning love, you are redefining it. You are choosing a love that is rooted in authenticity. Thank you, self-respect, and the recognition that the other's inner limitations are not your responsibility. There is a liberation in this truth that is both quiet and profound. When you stop attempting to repair what cannot be repaired, a space opens within you that is not defined by fear, anxiety, or self-doubt. Your emotional system is no longer overstimulated by the impossible demands of the other. You begin to rebuild your sense of self, independent of the mirroring and validation you previously sought. You become capable of seeing the narcissist clearly, without the haze of hope or denial. And in that clarity, you discover freedom, the freedom to engage in life as a whole, intact person. Ultimately, the hidden truth about marriage to a narcissist is not simply about understanding their limitations, it is about reclaiming your own power. The narcissist cannot give you what they do not possess. The moment you stop trying to extract, awaken, or repair them is the moment you begin to reclaim the life that has always belonged to you. Healing is not about changing them. It is about returning to yourself.